Y'all, this is Spencer Keck with the Hillbilly Think Tank. I am the educated hillbilly, and I'm coming at you live from here in Hardin County, where we know that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is what makes it all worthwhile. Y'all, you heard me say educated hillbilly. No, that's not an oxymoron. Don't call me a moron now. Y'all, there have been educated, erudite, and emancipated hillbillies ever since my family came through the Cumberland Gap with Daniel Boone. Now, there have also been many people in our history that we have completely forgotten about or tried to erase from our history. I'm here today to talk to you about one of those, because right now we've got a campaign to forget some really good people in our current history. We know that Major General Greene was fired by Whiskey Pete preacher Kegsbreath. You remember his Ezekiel 25:17 sermon he preached the other day, which doesn't even exist. That was a Bible verse from Pulp Fiction, which Quentin Tarantino made up. But Whiskey Pete didn't like it that he had a black brigadier general as the head of all the chaplains in the United States Army. So he made sure that was one more black leading officer that he's fired. He started off in his tenure, first thing he did was fire a 4-star general for the problem of being a general while being black. Remind you, it was under the president back when he was president number 45, when Captain Bone Spurs had his first term, was when that 4-star black general was hired. But Whiskey Pete Kegsbreath doesn't want anybody that is of color. So he fired him. And then, he fired this major general that was the head of all the chaplains. But again, like I said, his problem was he was a chaplain while black in the U.S. Army and didn't preach good enough for preacher Kegsbreath, who gave us that great sermon about Ezekiel 25:17. Well, I'm here to tell you about another amazing American that our nation has largely forgotten about. And he is a Kentucky native that for some reason we have decided, even before this administration, many, many years ago, to forget someone that actually paid his dues in becoming the best in his profession. Part of his dues were completed right here in Hardin County. He was a Kentucky native, and he ended up preaching here in Hardin County. So I'm going to tell you a story about a man called Allen Allensworth. Now, Allen was born in 1842 in Louisville, Kentucky. He was a slave. He was owned by the Starbird family. The Starbird family owned a pharmaceutical conglomerate that supplied wholesale pharmaceuticals to all of the state, but it was a very big producer there in Louisville. So you had Mr. Starbird, you had his business partner, John Starbird, and they controlled any pharmaceuticals that were sold in our state. Now, they also had a young son named Tommy, and Tommy needed a playmate. So today, I decided to go ahead and record outside here in our county some of the places that Allen Allensworth ended up living. And I'd like to show you one of them, if you would give me the time of day to do it. Please ignore the background noise, but think you might enjoy this. Again, it's local to us, and yeah, he was one of our own. So let's give him the honor of not forgetting what one of our greats was like. So again, Allen Allensworth, born in Louisville, but he's going to make his way to Elizabethtown in his amazing story of seeking freedom and finding it through education. And he would say through even the Lord. He became a preacher, which is a big, important part of his story. So, all right. But first, let's get an idea who the Buffalo Soldiers were, because that's who he ended up serving with. So, Allen Allensworth is going to go from being a slave in Louisville. He's going to be assigned to be the playmate to the Starbirds' young boy, their son named Tommy. Now, Tommy being a rich brat, and I guess they didn't have, rich parents setting themselves up for their kids to play with other rich kids, so they just had their slaves play with their little brats. So Tommy was assigned Allen for Allen to be his playmate. Allen, his mom told him, Allen, to be a man and to be respected in this American society, you have got to get an education. You've got to learn to read and write, or you will never be considered a man in this society. So to do so, you need to trick Tommy into teaching you how to read and write. So that's what he did. Their votes. So it is a beautiful Sunday day here in Elizabethtown, and I am on the southwest edge of District 3. Do a little walk around, do a little history, show you some of the places. Many that I think are awesome here. Starting off in the square, walking on down the square, starting off at Walker Square, and we'll end at Walker Square. So I get the camera person to walk a little faster and keep up with me. So coming down here to the square, of course, we know this is, well, I'd say one of the best parts of this town. We still have an active downtown. Got some great bars down here, restaurants, shopping. Talk about the shops here that my camera person's going to show. All right, I'm messing that up. I apologize to my viewers. Let me see if I can fix this real quick. There we go. So it is a beautiful Sunday day here. The shops here that my camera person's going to show. We've got running soles over here. I'd like to go there and get my running shoes, walking shoes. We've got a great coffee shop here that we often go to here. Of course, we've got the cannonball that she's going to point to up here that is replica of the one that was lodged in a wall during the Christmas raid back on December 27th, 1862, when John Hunt Morgan came here and lobbed into the city in Christmas time. So he was firing from the graveyard, which we know is over that way. And we've got Summer and I, my camera person, we've got some of our ancestors buried in that graveyard. So it's coming down this way. And I promised the camera girl that we're going to come here soon to Mud Puddle Pottery Company because this looks like it's got to be a fun place. Fun here, just sort of relaxing, painting of pottery. Enjoy yourself. All right, on the corner over here, if you haven't had some gelato from the Dreamery, you're missing out. Good stuff. Right next to the place, we've got JR Neighbors. Love to get food and drinks in there. Pizzeries. Let the camera person show us some pizzeries. Impellizzeri, other people pronounce it, but I've lived in Italy, so I like to pronounce it that way. Great place for, well, since I live in Italy, I consider that to be one of the two best places to get pizza in my district at least. So come on down here. We've got new style records. This is the veteran-owned record shop I was talking about. Lo-fi and sale records. Here we've got Bird with some books. I'm going to go in here and when we're done and see if they will. Camera person, please pay attention to me, okay? I want to see if Bird Whistle Books can order a book that I want. I'm pretty sure they can. Bought a lot of books there lately. Got that place. So, we're going to do a circle, and this is going to be a little bit of a history. So, we've already seen where John Hunt Morgan came in, lobbed cannonballs into town, killed, I believe the sign said, 7 U.S. troops. So, some people might not know, but John Hunt Morgan had sexual relations with some of his slaves. One of those, the children of those liaisons, would go on to get his freedom by going to Camp Nelson in Kentucky. He escaped slavery from Paris, Kentucky, went to Camp Nelson, and once he joined the U.S. Army there, that got him his freedom. Then, when that freed slave, who was a son of John Hunt Morgan, had a son, his son, if you look this up, is the person who invented the gas mask. The gas mask that firefighters still use, self-contained breathing apparatus, and the same gas mask that would save soldiers from German gas in World War I. So look up that Morgan. You're going to find that Morgan was amazing. But he had to go to Cincinnati and then to Cleveland to do his work because Kentucky would not let him get an education after the age of 13. Once he completed the 6th grade and was functionally illiterate, he went over to Ohio to work when he should have been in school the 7th grade if he had been white in Kentucky. But instead, went across the river, started working in a factory, spent his money after working a 12-hour day. He would spend his money then paying a tutor after work to teach him English that he should have gotten for free if he lived in Ohio instead of been born as a descendant of a slave in Kentucky. But that is another part of our history tour. Come on over here, and I'm going to briefly take hold of the camera as we walk this way. So we're walking down now to the original Severns Valley Baptist Church. So you see here, we're now coming up to Poplar. We got the original Severns Valley Baptist Church. So this is the oldest Baptist church west of the Allegheny Mountains. And it has stood here for quite some time. So my church is right around the corner. You'll be able to see it here in a second. And here is, first up, Severns Valley Baptist Church, like it says. the oldest continuing Baptist church west of the Allegheny Mountains, started in 1781, before Elizabethtown became part of Kentucky. Kentucky wasn't even a state yet. We were still part of Virginia, just a county of Virginia, of course. But look over there, you can see my church. But of course, we know now this is part of the Shriners Club. But the interesting thing is, if you look over here, this was an active church until 1974. Now, I've come here and I've looked at this sign many times. You notice they talked that the services were held here all the way till 1974. And this sign has been up here since 1977, right? This place was placed on the historical places list back then. But what wasn't there was a missing part of that history, which you can read from the sign. If you come over here now, you can see this sign telling you that this actually was also the first Black Baptist church, right? And so this became Hardin County's first Black Baptist church in 1866. And if you have a chance to come into town here, when you scan this, it will give you not just something for you to read, but you can actually have an augmented reality. You'll have a preacher pop out. You'll hear the African-American choir singing inside the church. And you'll actually find out that when the white folks left after the Civil War, Severance Valley white Baptists moved on, and the Black Baptists kept this place going. Well, it was about to go under as a black church. But in the 1870s, there was a freed slave named Allen Allensworth. He would go on to become Colonel Allen Allensworth. Now, Colonel Allen Allensworth was born in 1842 in Louisville. He was born a slave. He was assigned to be a playmate or a companion to the Starbird family's child, Tommy. Tommy was the same age as Allen Allensworth. Now, Allen's mom named him after a preacher, and I believe it was the American Methodist Episcopal Church, but I have to do a little more checking on that to make sure that was the denomination. But if I remember correctly, that was the name of a black bishop. And his mom was a very religious woman, inculcated Christianity into her son. And she also told her son, Allen, you will not be considered to be fully a man until you know how to read and write. Of course, that was illegal in all the South at that time. And of course, Kentucky, even though it officially stayed with the Union during the Civil War, we did not get rid of slavery. We didn't even get rid of slavery after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed. And we had to have all of the states in the Union have their votes for ratifying those constitutional amendments that Congress passed. Once 2/3 of the states voted to ratify those amendments, Kentucky voted no. They wanted to keep their slaves. Then, even after the Civil War was over, they finally were forced to release slaves here in this state. Hardin County had more slaves than most all the other counties at the time. So, and during the Civil War, leading right up to it. I'll try and leave a map of that showing how many each county had. It's pretty sad, but again, we have some interesting history. So, Allen Allensworth, he wanted to learn to read and write. His mom said, "Hey, Tommy is going to be going off to school. When he comes back home every day, pretend that you're playing school. Have him pretend that with you. Have him pretend to be the teacher. Have him teach you everything he learned at school that day." Well, he did that. So even though it was illegal for him as a black child, as a slave, to learn to read and write, he did. But Mrs. Starbird heard about this, saw it happening, got extremely angry with her rich brat, and told little Tommy that he better quit playing that game with their slave. So, what did little Tommy do? You tell a rich kid to stop something, he's not going to stop. His whole family owned the largest pharmaceutical warehouse and wholesale supply store in the state of Kentucky. It was a large company. You can still find some of their antique pharmaceutical bottles in antique shops. Pay a pretty price. You'll see Starbird and the other names of his partners on those pharmacy bottles. So, rich family. Yeah, little rich kid wasn't going to stop his fun game he had been playing for months, maybe even years up to this point, before the mom realized that Allen Allensworth had learned to read and write from her son. So she told him to stop again. He wouldn't stop. So like, all right, we're going to send Tommy to work with another family, although the Starbirds retained ownership of Allen. So they sent him to the Talbot family. Well, turns out Talbot family was borrowing Tommy because Mrs. Talbot, elderly Mrs. Talbot, needed someone to help out while her son was working in his shop in Louisville. So Mrs. Talbot was Quaker. Quakers were abolitionists. They did not believe in slavery. So elderly Miss Talbot gave Allen a room of his own. Or actually, I think she let him have his own bed in her bedroom where he was attending to helping her out. But she kept teaching him to read and write, bought him books, sent him to St. Peter's Protestant Episcopal Church, which is today St. Peter's Episcopal Church. It was in the West End. That's where he would go and get reading and writing lessons during their Sunday school for that church. Now, once the Starbird family found out that not only was Allen Allensworth not being treated like a slave with the Talbot family, he was still getting an education. Miss Starbird was enraged with the Talbots and with Allen Allensworth. So, one of the partners of the Starbirds, Mr. Smith, he had a plantation in Henderson, Kentucky. He said, "Hey, we'll teach him not to learn anymore." So they shipped him off to Henderson. Brutal life there. It's horrendous. I don't want to take up all the time telling you how absolutely horrible the beatings were that he received there. He still wanted to learn to read and write. The family that he was staying with had a white orphan that was going to school, wasn't any good at his lessons. They would sneak off together, and Allen would tutor him while Allen was also learning more himself with the books that this orphan had. Well, you can imagine that didn't turn out good. Received beatings so bad that his bloody body as a 12-year-old would be bleeding. He'd pass out. Yeah. Well, eventually he decided he wanted to get that path to freedom by crossing over the Ohio River into Indiana. He hid out for 2 weeks, run around the woods and the nearby plantations and farms. He was caught. He escaped. He made it into Henderson. He was just getting ready to figure out how to cross the river, make it over into Indiana. And the family doctor of the family that he was supposed to be on the plantation with, that family doctor turned him in because, of course, we know the Fugitive Slave Act at that time said anybody could snatch up a runaway slave and get a reward. So the family whose farm, plantation he was enslaved on, they decided, they sent the message back to Louisville to the Starbird family. Starbird family said, apparently we can't force Allen to quit being uppity and want to get an education. Sell him down the river. So at age 13, he was sold in auction in Henderson, sold down the river to Memphis, put in the slavery stockyards, you could call it, because that's what they were, treated just like stock, cattle, chattel slavery, and sold in Memphis, down the river to New Orleans. He gets in the slave pens of thousands and thousands of folks that were there for sale. Again, age 13, he's seeing the slave owners come in and have their way with the slave girls that were up for sale before and after they would buy them. He witnesses this atrocity. I guess the habits of the ultimate rich, they don't die after, 150 years? Even the Civil War couldn't stop that type of atrocities to the impoverished, the downtrodden. So Allen witnesses that. He is bought by a horse trader, horse racer, that also trades slaves, bought and traded them. This guy was also a gambler. Turns out this guy, when he wasn't selling his slaves off, I guess he treated most of them decently, at least Allen. Once he found out that Allen had some talent and intelligence and learned to read, knew that he actually was not upset with Allen for knowing how to read, because he's like, oh, that means when I send you on an errand, you're going to be able to read the street signs, make it there and back by yourself. I won't have to send someone else out with you to read the signs for you on errands I send you on. He also says, oh, Allen, I'm going to use you as my horse trainer and jockey. So here he is, 13, 14, in New Orleans. Doesn't know that two or three of his brothers have been sold down the river also. They're in New Orleans. Also doesn't know that during those many years that he's down.
All right. Joining me today on iHip News is Brad Lander, who has spent years.
Allen, while he's trying to, of course, still escape from slavery, he is 13, 14, and his new slave owner, New Orleans, is treating him well, feeding him well. He's actually got decent clothes. He's not being beat like he was in Kentucky. But his owner, sadly, is a gambler, not just a horse trader and not just a slave trader. So he often will get in debt. So at one point, there is a plantation owner comes up from Mississippi with this young, as the book says, mulatto girl. It's obvious that this was the man's daughter, and he wants to trade her off. So she's right around Allen's age. He says he wants a comely boy, and the trader that owns Allen is about to trade off Allen for this young girl. But he makes the mistake of saying, oh, hey, check it out. This slave knows how to read and write. He'll be a good help to you. This enrages the plantation owner. What kind of uppity blankety blank blank do you think that I'm looking for? Does this sound familiar? No, you're trying to swindle me. So before the deal breaks down instead of Allen being traded for the young girl, another young boy is traded in Allen's place. So that young girl is now, for common reference, what we know today, this is the plaything now for this slave owner, this horrible individual that now owns Allen. So this guy says, hey, I am a horse racer, not just a horse trader. I'm a horse racer. You're going to be my jockey, and we're going to go to Louisville. So by the time he's 19, about 19, it's time for him to head up to Louisville. Actually, he still would have been a young teenager. By the time they make it to Louisville in 61, Allen has seen so many atrocities. He's seen the way the trade slavers took advantage of every one of the women. If they thought they looked good, that was horrible because they took advantage of them before trading them. Now he sees this one that is owned. This young mulatto girl is basically the sexual toy of this owner. Again, I'm telling the story because I want folks to know that we've allowed these Epstein jackaloons to get away with this crap for years and years and years and turn a blind eye. If it's done to poor kids, poor girls, poor young men, we turn a blind eye in this country. There's no justice for the rich. If they do something wrong, they don't feel the wrath of the justice system. So Allen Allensworth sees, as they're traveling from New Orleans all the way up to Louisville, of course, slow travel back then, that every place they stop, all the slaves sleep in the stables with the horses, except for this young girl who's now been traded off. So again, you can look at the whole slave industry as being an industry just like the Epstein's industry. It hasn't changed, but it needs to change in a really drastic way if we're really going to take control of our country. Part 2. So Allen Allensworth, he's back up in Louisville. He's been sold to a farm 12 miles south of Louisville. With my research, thanks to the Filson Historical Society in Louisville, I found out that the 25-acre plantation he was sold to, that was 12 miles south of Louisville, 25-acre plantation, 12 miles south of Louisville. It's located in what is today Shively. And right now, there is a Black Baptist church on the site of the plantation that he was sold to when the Union garrison is all around Louisville and they're ready for Bragg to come in. They're ready for the big fight. Well, the owner of Allen at this point also is the owner or the head of the Bank of Kentucky. And he owns 2 properties in Old Louisville today. What was, that's the part of town he lived in. And he had this plantation south that's now in Shively. Allen is talking to some of the officers of the Union Army, because we got the Michigan and the Illinois armies there. As he's talking to some of them from Michigan, one of the officers is, of course, an abolitionist. And, they're camped right on the edge of this plantation. And Allen tells this officer, like, hey, I've been trying to get to freedom in Canada, and this will be my 3rd attempt if I can do it. I want to escape this slavery. The officer listens to him and says, hey, here's the plan. We're going to be leaving and marching out of Louisville to go chase General Bragg. Now, at this point, no freed slaves were allowed to join the army. That didn't happen until 1863. This is 1861. Allen is about 19 years old. And the officer says, here's the plan. We're going to give you an old uniform. I say old because this unit had already seen a lot of action before they got to what's today Shively. We're going to give you this old uniform. Smear some mud all over your face so you're unrecognizable. Put a pot in your head. Give you a bedroll to wrap around your neck to obscure your visage a little bit more. And you're going to march down Salt River Road with us. We're going to take a right on Main Street. We're going to go through Louisville on Main Street. And then we're going to march out of town. You'll be free and on your own once we get you free of Louisville and free of this area. So they did that. Salt River Road is Dixie. Of course, we know Dixie goes all the way from here all the way into Louisville. Well, it was Salt River Road back then when it was by Shively. They went what today is Dixie Highway, took a right on Main Street, all the way down through Louisville, right past the bank where his slave owner was, and out of town with them. He gets out of town. He gets to freedom, quasi-freedom. He would have had to escape more on his own. He decides, you know what? I'm not going to Canada. He realized that these people that were fighting for people like him to be free, he should do something with them. So he couldn't join active duty in the military. He became a civilian volunteer, was in their hospital corps, and all the way from outside of Louisville, from Louisville all the way out. Once he decided he was going to be a civilian volunteer with the U.S. Army, he was in it all the way. He was with the doctors taking care of the wounded soldiers in the Battle of Perryville and all the battles from Kentucky as they chased Bragg all the way down to Nashville. Got down to Nashville, came very close to being captured in Murfreesboro when the Union forces were briefly routed, and he and the battalion surgeon escape. The battalion surgeon says to him, when they finally make it to safety in Nashville, set up a clinic, he's like, you know what? We've been at this for over a year and a half. I'm going to go home, take some leave in Ohio. I want you to come to Georgetown, Ohio with me. So for the first time in his life, Allen Allensworth goes from Tennessee. They go up to Cincinnati. It was Georgetown. They're in Ohio, and he tastes freedom. His family treats him just like that he's part of their family. He gets his first bedroom, first time in his life, all by himself, just freedom, walking in freedom in Ohio. He's loving it. And then by the time the Emancipation Proclamation rolls around, 1963, he's like, all right, I can either go to Canada now or I can stay in this fight. He realizes by this time that this fight is to end slavery. It's the abolitionist cause. They're going to get rid of slavery. So he joins the U.S. Navy, gets a recommendation from a lot of the folks he had served with as a volunteer, civilian volunteer in the hospital corps of the Army. They recommend him for the Navy. A little bit back part of the story, when he had been sold down the river from Henderson, Kentucky to Memphis, Kentucky, and to the thousands of folks he was in the pen with in New Orleans. Of course, he got a lot of river experience there on the boat. Got to see how boats operated, how ships operated. Before that, when they moved him from Louisville, and and moved him down to Henderson. The plantation down there, when he went, that trip was on a steamboat full of gamblers and, crazy slave traders, basically. But on that ride from Louisville to Henderson, he learned how to be a cabin boy. So by the time he's joining the Navy, he's going to actually get hired on as a first-class seaman. That makes his pay higher than most of the guys starting out. And no time at all, they recognize how good he is at his job, how hard he works, how honest he is, and they make him a petty officer. So that's, if he was in the Army, he would have been a corporal. Soon enough, the captain sees how great a job he does. He makes him his steward. So that's the guy who basically takes care of cooking for the captain, cleaning the captain's stateroom. And now he's a first-class petty officer. So by that time, he makes the rank that I was when I retired from the Navy. And he does that in 2 years of fighting up and down the rivers, Ohio River, Tennessee River, you name it. He's up and down it, quite a few gunships. And by the time the war's out, he comes back to Louisville, reunited with his mom, finds out that one of his sisters has worked herself literally blind in order to work off her slavery. She's got her freedom along with her son. And he and his brother, one of his many brothers, they go to St. Louis, start a couple of very successful restaurants. Allen cashes out of that. His brother starts another business in St. Louis, stays there. Allen comes back to Louisville. He becomes an educator. He goes to the Eli Normal School for freemen, starts getting education. Soon, he's hired on to teach schools and Sunday schools. Then he gets a call. He realizes he needs to be a minister. So he goes and is sent down by the American Missionary Association down to the university in Nashville, studies theology for quite a few years to work and pay for his school. There's actually a teeny tiny church in Franklin, Kentucky, had about 15 people there. And they agreed that they will pay him just enough to basically go back, have a train ride back and forth from Franklin, which is right there in the border, if you probably know, of Tennessee and Kentucky. And that they pay for his train ride back and forth from Nashville to there. He gets his experience learning how to preach. He also, this church is about to fall apart. He uses his Navy experience with discipline, order, and organization to organize this church. Goes from 15 people to 65 people because he's teaching every child of these former slaves that are in this church, teaching them how to read before Sunday school. It's at Sunday school every day. Sunday school is designed to teach kids to read. So all these kids, their parents are now coming. They're learning to read. They're bringing more kids, more families. He becomes known as the children's preacher because every church he goes to, it grows threefold, fivefold due to his influence, his intellect. He gets finished with his science and theology teaching, and he comes back to Louisville after preaching in Franklin for a bit. He is assigned next to Georgetown, Kentucky. Actually, no. Next, they say, hey, you need that experience you got in Franklin. There is a church that's about to fall apart, and it's in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. We need you to go down there before this church falls apart and doesn't exist anymore. So that was Severns Valley Baptist Church, which I showed you in the video. Now, we know Severns Valley is still here, one of the largest churches in this county, but that little white church I showed you, that they just recently put up that new sign with a new historical marker in addition to that brass one that's been there since the 70s. This new one reveals that was the first Black Baptist church. That was the name of it for many years, but starting with first during the Civil War era, if you were Black, they didn't want you to hear any of the messages of preachers because they were afraid that would lead to more Nat Turners leading to rebellions against the slave owners, or more folks like John Brown being able to encourage slaves not to be slaves anymore. So they would have the black folks down in the basements of the church. They'd have a patrolman there listening to what they were saying to make sure they weren't planning any insurrections while at church. Yeah, they decided after Nat Turner they didn't want black folks to read or to have religion. Go back and look at the history books. I'm getting this straight from research. It's a fact. But war's over. The former slave owners have now moved out of the Severance Valley Church, and it's their church all the way till 1974. And that still is a church that is active here in Elizabethtown. It's just in a different location. Thanks to Allen Allensworth. The church, like I said, disorganized. Their previous preacher had run it into debts. It was about to go into complete bankruptcy. He just turns things around. So he's here for 2 years. Then the church that he preached at previously in Franklin, they want him to come back. He does. He's there for a little while. He ends up preaching Georgetown, Louisville, Bowling Green. I mean, every church he goes to grows, expands, and they're still in existence today. He is one of the founders of what was then called the State University, or the State School, State University, I believe. Now it's called Simmons College, named after the reverend that he and another preacher got from Lexington to come over and become the president of the school. So, yeah, again, have you seen any signs for Allen Allensworth in Louisville? Have you seen any signs saying, this is Allen Allensworth's Louisville? Where are signs here in Hardin County saying, hey, this is Allen Allensworth's Elizabethtown? Because he was here probably the same time that General Custer was here. But the story goes on. Twice, Allen Allensworth is sent as the Republican Party's delegate to the Republican National Convention. He gets to vote for the Garfield presidency. He gets to vote for other presidencies. His candidate doesn't win the second time around. A Democrat wins. And hey, he still actually has friends on both sides of the aisle, all over the South, because he has a calling for people to have him come speak and preach everywhere from Boston, Philadelphia, you name it. They want to hear Allensworth speak and preach. They even are printing his speeches in papers all over the United States. Southern Democrats, they actually have a good relationship with him, even though he's a Republican. This is the Reconstruction era. He was probably rubbing shoulders with General Custer when General Custer was here in Elizabethtown for a couple of years with his wife. Remember, he was ordered here to put down the Ku Klux Klan before they sent him back out west with the Buffalo Soldiers. Well, that leads us to the next part of the story. And that's why I've got you all here. Hopefully, I haven't gotten you bored yet. But at the age of 42, 44, actually age of 42, before he goes and off with his family to Cincinnati, because he wants his girls to get more education, wants them to get more culture, and like, hey, we got to take them from Bowling Green. Let's get them somewhere else. They get a call, hey, why don't you come preach in Cincinnati? But before he goes, Buffalo Soldier comes to him and says, Reverend, all the white soldiers in the cavalry have white chaplains. We don't have a chaplain. Why don't you find chaplains to replace at least one or two of these chaplains that are about to retire in our unit? Well, he decides, you know what? I think I'll do that. Age 42, 44. Now, I retired from the military at that age. Remember, he's already served in the Navy up to this point. So he calls in all of his political favors, all of his cachet throughout the South and North even. Was mainly the Republicans that were in office and the Southern Democrats. He had great relationships with both. He had good relationships with our governor, and he requested that they put him in for a nomination to be a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army and a chaplain. This had to go up to the president, and then it had to go from the president. Senate would have to approve it. It takes a few years, and he's up in Cincinnati for a year or two, and he gets the word, hey, you have been chosen to receive a commission in the U.S. Army as an officer and to be the first Black chaplain in the U.S. Army. Now, usually when you're newly commissioned with just a bachelor's degree today, you would become a second lieutenant in the Army. You won't make the rank of 03 unless you have a master's degree. Well, at this point, Allen had been given another honorary degree. I'm not sure if that back then was a master's degree or not, but he had his theology training. He had been preaching and was well thought after all over the United States, also involved in politics, as long as it didn't take him away from preaching and education, because he was always educated no matter where he went. He was setting up schools during the week, teaching during the week, and then preach on the weekends. So he gets his commission at age 44. He's commissioned. And him and his family, they head out to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He spends a 20-year career in the U.S. Army as a chaplain. They commission him, though, not as a lieutenant, but as a captain. He goes straight to 03. That's a big deal. Even today, that's a big deal. So Fort Sill, he is the preacher, the chaplain for all the soldiers in Fort Sill. So these Buffalo soldiers, African-American soldiers, they all have their kids out there with them now. These are former slaves that are now soldiers. Now remember, the Buffalo soldiers were not allowed to serve anywhere east of the Mississippi because those former slave owners in the South did not want these former slaves with guns anywhere near them, knowing how they had treated them and their families before this. So all the Buffalo soldiers had to serve out west. They're the ones who built the infrastructure, built the roads, built the forts that the settlers could go to. You name it, they were doing work out there. They even were the first park rangers when we started our first park in Yosemite. That was the Buffalo soldiers, all these African-American soldiers. So Allensworth is in Fort Sill. He's the preacher. He's the teacher. He starts schools for every single school-age child on the base. He also realizes, hey, his men need to learn to read and write. That was the whole thing he fought for his whole life. As soon as he could learn to read, around 7 or 9, whenever Tommy Starbird went off to school. So he now is making sure that all of his soldiers get to learn to read and write. But then he also realized they needed a differentiated curriculum. He couldn't teach the adults to read and write and educate them in the same way that he could children. So he writes one of the most, PhD level letters and treaties for the Department of War to fund his educational program for his soldiers. He recognizes these adults need an adult education curriculum, that he needs to write it, create it. It needs to be centered around trades that they're going to learn while they're in the military and use in the military and use when they get out. The Department of War approves the appropriations, the money for his curriculum and for him to be able to teach all these adult soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, he does this, and also he is the treasurer for the whole fort, for the whole base. So he's in charge of payroll. He's in charge of making sure that everyone is paid that sells the base food supplies and any supplies. He's in charge of the money and the preaching and the teaching. What an amazing man. His mama had told him he was going to be famous. So Fort Sill, he serves there. He serves in Utah. He serves even in Fort Harrison, Montana, which is the last place I ever worked for the federal government. I worked at the VA there at Fort Harrison. The hospital in Fort Harrison is located right on the base that now, instead of being an active duty Army base, it's a National Guard and Reservist base. They're in Helena, Montana. It's also where later the Special Forces were formed with the United States and Canada together for World War II, but that's another history story. So he retires after a 20-year career, goes to California, starts a town for black farmers. They name it Allensworth, California. They had their own schools, their own judicial systems, you name it, doctors, everything. Farming town so that black farmers could have their own farming community. It's an amazing story. He's killed when he's by two teenagers on a motorcycle in 19, I believe, either 04 or 1914. 1914, I think it is. So, but that's not it. That's not the whole story. So I said he was a Buffalo Soldier. The Buffalo Soldiers, if you don't know how they got their name, the Indians that they were sent out to fight, they were part of Custer's crew that when Custer got wiped out there in Montana. Well, the Indians had such respect for these African American soldiers that they named them after the animal that is the most sacred to them, and that they thought these men looked the most like their sacred animal. So let's hear a little bit about one of their most famous charges. So remember, he's a Buffalo Soldier after Reconstruction, and at this point, he's in Utah when the Spanish-American War starts. And he gets a call. Hey, we need you to stop what you're doing on your duties there in Utah at that fort. We need you to come back to Louisville, Kentucky, and to recruit 2,500 men. It was going to be a temporary duty. He had to leave his family there in Utah, come out here to Louisville. And the time that he's out here in that temporary duty, he recruits 5,000 men. So when you hear the story about that charge on San Juan Hill that's credited to, the Rough Riders, and they don't show black soldiers there, actually the black soldiers were up that hill before Teddy Roosevelt ever was, and before the Rough Riders ever were. They had actually mostly taken that hill. But who got a medal for it? Who got the Medal of Honor for it? Prima donna Teddy Roosevelt. So, yeah, let's hear a little bit about that story.
Roosevelt. American hero. Rough Rider. President. But what if I told you his greatest victory wasn't really his? Nope. The men who actually saved the day were black soldiers history barely talks about. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, Roosevelt charged up San Juan Hill. You know, that famous heroic painting they show in textbooks? Well, here's what they don't show or tell you. Right beside Teddy's Rough Riders were the Buffalo Soldiers, black cavalrymen from the 9th and 10th Regiments, while Roosevelt was charging forward yelling, "Follow me!" They were the ones already at the top, taking heavy fire and clearing the way. Some accounts even say Roosevelt would have been wiped out if the Buffalo Soldiers didn't hold the line and return fire. And guess what? Teddy Roosevelt got the Medal of Honor. The Buffalo Soldiers, they got almost erased from the entire story. So next time someone says Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders won San Juan Hill, tell them he and his Rough Riders had a little help and they were black, brave, and unsung heroes. Teddy Roosevelt.
Now, we can also tell them that was a lot of Kentuckians that were there, because Allen Allensworth had been in Kentucky and recruited 5,000 soldiers for that war. So I'm sure they were with the cavalry in Cuba, we know that, and in Puerto Rico, and in the Philippines, because after he recruited way more than he was ordered to from Kentucky, he goes back to Utah, Allen Allensworth does, and they're like, "Hey, you did such a good job in Kentucky. Now, I'm sorry, we need you to go to Knoxville, Tennessee, and you're going to recruit in Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. They gave him a higher number this time. Again, he exceeded it. So, anytime you hear about the Spanish-American War, don't forget, it was those guys that were at the top of the hill before Teddy Roosevelt. And I'm sure included there, but we just don't get to hear about it, were a lot of Hardin Countyans, a lot of Jefferson Countyans that Allen Allensworth recruited when he recruited black soldiers from our state and from the rest of the South very successfully. Now, again, why do I tell you this story? Well, that's because we're just letting this part of our history be erased. Why don't we have a placard for Allen Allensworth here in our county? Heck, not only did he save the first Black Baptist church from going under with his organization and his teaching skills and his preaching skills, he came back to Kentucky and got a lot of great soldiers from this area, from all over Kentucky, former slaves. He got them all hitched up into the Army to have, a big part of our history. So, yeah, let's see what Colonel Powell had to say about those Buffalo soldiers. And now that we know a big part of that story is Allen Allensworth of Kentucky. There is now finally in Kansas a monument to the Buffalo soldiers. And this is the dedication ceremony. And we got to get to hear General Powell, the highest ranking at that time, general in the Army, talking about these Buffalo soldiers and what their history means to us.
General reads from Gerson's farewell letter to his troops.
The officers and enlisted men have cheerfully endured many hardships and privations, and in the midst of great dangers, steadfastly maintained a most gallant and zealous devotion to duty. And they may well be proud of the record made and rest assured that the hard work undergone in the accomplishment of such important and valuable service to their country cannot fail sooner or later to meet with due recognition and reward. Benjamin H. Gerson, Colonel, 10th United States Cavalry. And now 104 years later, July 25th, 1992, his dream of recognition and reward has finally come true. And so has my dream. Beginning with the Buffalo soldiers in 1866, African Americans would henceforth always be in uniform, challenging the conscience of a nation, posing the question of how could they be allowed to defend the cause of freedom, to defend the nation, if they themselves were to be denied the benefits of being Americans. The great liberator Frederick Douglass made the same point. Douglass said, "Once let the black man get upon his person the brass letters U.S. Let him get an eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulder and bullets in his pocket, and there is no power on earth which can deny that he has earned the right to citizenship in the United States of America." So look at this statue. Look at him. Imagine him in his coat of blue, on his horse, a soldier of the nation, eagles on his buttons, crossed sabers on his canteen, a rifle in his hand, a pistol on his hip, courageous, iron-willed. He was every bit the soldier that his white brother was. He showed that the theory of inequality must be wrong. He could not be denied his right. It might take time. It did take time. But he knew that in the end, he could not be denied. The Buffalo soldiers were not the only ones in this struggle. the 24th and the 25th Infantry Regiments, the 92nd and 93rd Infantry Divisions, the high-flying Tuskegee Airmen, the parachuting Triple Nickels, our Navy's Golden 13, the Montford Point Marines, and thousands of other brave Black Americans have gone in harm's way for their country since the days of the Buffalo Soldier, always moving forward and upward, step by step, sacrifice by sacrifice. But we are not here today to criticize an America of 150 years ago, but to rejoice that we live in a country that has permitted a spiritual descendant of the Buffalo Soldier to stand before you today as the first African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
And I'm here today to tell you that it is absolute travesty against the honor of the men who settled the West, who were right there in front of Teddy Roosevelt when the Buffalo Soldiers took that hill in San Juan. It's an absolute travesty that we have an administration that is trying to wipe out the history of African Americans, of Hispanic Americans, of any minority that would stand shoulder to shoulder with me in the military. What on earth is wrong? When are we going to come back to honoring every single American? This Whiskey Pete Kegsbreath, the preacher who preaches verses that don't even exist in the Bible, and he does it at the Pentagon. This guy is telling us that Powell was hired because he was of a certain color, that he was a DEI hire, as if diversity, equity, and inclusion is an evil. It's evil to be diverse, to have people that don't look like me with me when I go to work, when I fight for my country, to having a platoon that includes people that look just like all the people in this county. Red, yellow, black, and white. I heard a song when I was a kid that said, red, yellow, black, and white, they are precious in his sight, but apparently not in the Bible of Pulp Fiction that Whiskey Pete Kegsbreath preaches from. He fired the most recent 4-star general that we had in office that was akin to Chairman Powell. They fired him because he said he was a DEI hire. The next second highest in rank was a female, white female admiral. Fired her, said she was a diversity, equity, and inclusion hire. As if that is a sin. That's what makes this country great, is our diversity, our equity, and our inclusion. Our raising people to the heights because they show they can do a great job, regardless of race. But now, this whole guy is going to tell us he's going to fire a black chaplain, a brigadier general, firing without cause, saying, oh, he didn't mention the word of God enough. He only said God a couple times. He said inclusive words more than that. So I have to get rid of him. Now, you go and look at the witness of folks who have been ministered to throughout Brigadier General's career. You're going to find out that is a load of horse shit. To anyone who's been ministered to by him on the battlefield, that was a load of crap. But this Hegseth has refused to let any other generals rise up from minority ranks. Guys, this is not the America that I fought for. The America that my brother and my dad died for from their wounds in Vietnam and Afghanistan. This is not what we fought for. I fought for every single person in Hardin County and all of Kentucky and all of America being able to serve right alongside me and take my place now that I'm retired, regardless of their color. But not for Whiskey Pete, not for Preacher Pete. Remember, he knows more about being a preacher than anyone else. And that's why he did this.
While they will retain rank as an officer, to those they serve, their rank will not be visible. Instead, they will be seen among the highest ranks because of their divine calling. This reform is intended to uplift and celebrate the chaplain's role as a chaplain. It also removes any unease or anxiety junior officers or enlisted personnel may have in approaching an officer, potentially a senior officer, for guidance on sensitive matters, such as addiction, relationships, or struggles with faith. The core functions of the chaplain.
So, chaplains don't just serve to let Whiskey Pete preach his theology. Whiskey Pete wants to make sure that there are no more Jewish chaplains, no more Muslim chaplains, no more Catholic chaplains, because remember, he did not allow the Catholics to have a service on Good Friday at the Pentagon, but he allowed and encouraged all the Protestants to come to the sermon that he preached, right? So who's got the DEI now? Who is being hired just because they fit into a mold that he says they have to be in? You know, this is a bunch of horse shit. I haven't ever met a chaplain that used his rank against a soldier, a Marine, or a sailor. Ever. But I also has never heard a chaplain preach like Preacher Whiskey Pete did when he preached at the Pentagon.
It's CSAR 2517, and it reads, and pray with me, please. Blessed is he who in the name of camaraderie and duty shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to capture and destroy my brother. And you will know my call sign is Sandy 1 when I lay my vengeance upon thee. And amen. So the prayer is CSAR 25.
So that was directly from the movie Pulp Fiction. So all he did was quote Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction. And yet he's going to tell us that he knows more about Christianity and about preaching than the Navy chaplains do, and the Navy chaplains shouldn't have their rank. Yeah, this is so he doesn't have to salute any more black officers, because this is a guy who doesn't return a salute to black officers. Look at the footage. You can find plenty of it. He never salutes anyone of rank that is black.
You read the Bible, Brett?
Yes.
Well, there's this passage I got memorized. Sort of fits this occasion. Ezekiel 25:17.
Doesn't exist.
The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
So that's the Bible that Whiskey Pete preaches from. And we're supposed to say that this guy, Whiskey Pete Kegsbreath, has a clue about what chaplains do and the benefits of chaplains. Chaplains are who we go to in the military if we need to talk to someone, but they don't have psychiatrists on the line. They're not forward deployed to listen to folks that are being beset by PTSD in combat. But the chaplains are. The chaplains are forward deployed. They're to minister to us and to listen to us and talk to us, help us get through what we need to get through. But I've never, ever had one use his rank on me. Just the opposite.
Chaplain Corps were changed and watered down until they were viewed by many as nothing more than therapists. Spiritual health is equally important to a service member's physical and emotional health. This update is part of our efforts to return the Chaplain Corps to its core mission of serving the spiritual needs of our warfighters, 82% of whom identify as being religious.
So he decides what religions are acceptable and which ones aren't. He decided that out of the 200 religions that have been recognized, they're now only going to recognize 13. And when you go look at it, when he talks about religions, he's really talking about denominations of Christianity. So we are not sitting in a good spot, y'all. And I'm sorry, chaplains have provided many folks that I know with what they need, not just spiritually, but especially for counseling. And every minister I know that has a master's degree in divinity and is ordained by a church that actually has their pastor study, they all do some studies and some work in counseling. That's part of being a real minister, not just telling people they're going to hell or heaven. There's more to it than that. But yeah, if you believe that Ezekiel 25:17 is real and that it's all about with vengeance sending folks to violence, then yeah, you're the kind of person who believes that chaplains are just there for his idea of whatever spirituality is. So we're at the crossroads, and someone like Colonel Allen Allensworth, we need to bring back his memory now more than ever. Allen was recognized. He was far more than just a preacher. He was a teacher. He knew that educated folks is what he wanted. He wanted folks to have a sound mind, not just magical thinking. And we need more leaders just like him. Today, it is an absolute dishonor the way that our current chaplain corps is being treated. I never thought I would say that. The way that this brigadier general was just fired for no good reason except the fact that he was black. And yeah, Whiskey Pete is overreaching. He's not doing a good job in Iran. They're lying to us about the pilot that supposedly they rescued over Easter. They rescued in 3 days like Jesus. They came up with this propaganda story. We're still supposed to be chewing on it and biting on it and believing it, but they're all lying to us. And now they're doing crap like this. Remember, Hardin County, we've got folks who have stood up and dealt with much harder things here in this county. We've got people we can look back to, like Allen Allensworth, who was a great person for this county and for all of our nation. But we can't do it if we're allowing pedophiles to go free and acting like that's A-okay. And if we're going to listen to Whiskey Pete tell us about Ezekiel, well, he needs to show us his new Bible. That's what we need. All right, y'all. Remember, I'm running for magistrate here in Hardin County, District 3. And I recognize that I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper, because I know that Kentucky's motto, united we stand, divided we fall, can only happen if we're all concerned about the welfare and the well-being of all of our brothers and sisters in this country. And we're going to start with this county. I will work for you if you'll elect me. And let's keep life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness at the forefront for all of us, no matter who we are in this county, no matter where we are in this county. Bless your corazon. I hope you had a great weekend. Please remember all those deployed overseas today, tomorrow, and let's bring them home. Insist that they bring them back from this nonsense. Have a great one. Hopefully Monday is great for you. Hopefully your flowers are blooming from all this rain that we've got, and you're happy.